All right. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the OCD and Anxiety Show. My name is Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And so, in this episode, I want to talk about how to do ERP or exposure and response prevention when it comes to intrusive thoughts and pure OCD. So, pure OCD is a term that was, it's kind of been disproven in this idea that there's a form of OCD where it's purely obsessional, or you're only having thoughts, and there's no behaviors. And this is usually kind of encompasses the intrusive thoughts, right? They can be intrusive, harmful thoughts, sexual thoughts, thoughts about one's faith or religion or existential ideas, relationships. They can kind of cover this broad stroke of different concepts. So when it comes to doing ERP, it used to be thought that pure OCD was very challenging because the whole idea of ERP, right, is to expose yourself to the trigger and then remove the behavioral responses, or prevent the compulsive responses. And so when it comes to intrusive thoughts, one of the things that we need to understand is when it comes to exposure is that what most people think the worst thing about intrusive thoughts is actually that their benefit in many cases, in the sense that the intrusive thoughts are just so bombarding, right? They just happen. A lot of times people will report, well, hey, like as soon as I wake up, the thoughts start, and they're here at work, and then they're here at dinner, and then they're here right when I'm going to bed, right? And that actually, we can use that against the OCD and anxiety, right? Because every time they show up, that's an opportunity for exposure, right? Most people with intrusive thoughts, most of the exposure that's needed is just day to day, right? They just happen all the time, or certain things trigger them. And these are the times to do exposure. Now, yes, there are different types of exposures to do, and proactively, and I talk about those in the Taking Back Control program. But when it comes to like, how do we do ERP for intrusive thoughts? Well, ERP is done when, like, by exposing yourself to the thoughts. And like I said, oftentimes with intrusive thoughts, they're just happening all the time. So that idea of the exposure is just always taking place. And so if we're able to then put the correct behavioral techniques, right, which again I teach the AAA response, into place with these thoughts, your day-to-day life becomes doing ERP, because you're not engaging in any of the behaviors that are reinforcing the thoughts. So with intrusive thoughts and pure O thoughts specifically, a lot of the time, the behaviors that people are engaging in are mental. So they're things like rumination, right? Analyzing, worrying, trying to figure out something, trying to control or reassure yourself, or like all these things that you're just doing in your head. So the confusion that I think happens is that people think that because the intrusive thought happens automatically, and that it's uncomfortable, it causes anxiety, and then all the things you do in your head after to try to figure out that thought or resolve it or get rid of it, whether it's thought blocking, thought replacement, or fill in the blank, they assume that that's all obsession, and it's not, right? The obsession is the initial thought that happens, right? That initial intrusive thought, what if this, or the image, or that statement, or it can take on so many variations, but that initial thought happens, and that is the obsession. And then all the behaviors that you do mentally or physically, but usually when it comes to these thoughts, we're doing a lot of mental behaviors. All those things are the things that you're doing that are keeping that wheel about that concept or topic or thought spinning. Okay, so important that we understand that. So doing ERP is about removing those behaviors, and that is so fundamental to understand, that we're not trying to get rid of the initial thought that happens. We're removing the behaviors that you're doing that are perpetuating that wheel. And so, at Restored Minds, what I teach is the AAA response. And the reason that I teach the AAA response to people is because the thoughts happen so fast, that and oftentimes you can just get kind of lost in it, right? You could just kind of like 30 minutes into your loop, you can just realize that you're looping. So the first thing, again, is really coming back to this idea of like being aware that you're ruminating, that you're going in this loop. And then it's about, okay, instead of trying to figure out all the behaviors you're doing and get rid of them, it's pretty challenging to do. And this is why having a solution focused model on what to do every single time is so important. Because if you're trying not to do something, I tell people it's similar to, me telling someone who wrestles with alcoholism to, just tell them don't drink. It's like, well, yeah, that might be an accurate statement. Excuse me. That might be an accurate statement when it comes to the long run of what the goal is, right? If someone is wrestling with alcoholism, if I tell them not to drink and they don't drink, problem solved, right? But we know that it doesn't work like that. That's not that easy, because these behaviors are habitual. And oftentimes it's like, subconscious stuff that's driving these behaviors, right? So when it comes to ERP with these thoughts, it's so important that we focus on what to do. That shift is everything in this journey, because if you're trying not to ruminate or not to have these thoughts or not to replace, like all the different behaviors, you're still focusing on the problem at hand instead of switching to that solution focused model. And when we focus on what to do every time, we can start to develop the correct habitual behavior patterns that are helping us break that loop. And that's really the idea of implementing a solution focused approach. So when it comes to doing ERP, yes, there are narratives and thought loops and all these other things. And I go into the depth on those in the Taking Back Control program. But like I said, the problem is that if you do those exposures and you try to do them on your own, and then you go and ruminate after, like that exposure is actually feeding the loop. People think that just doing exposure, especially one-off exposure, is going to help break the loop or is going to help. And it's like, no, exposure is, when it's done correctly, is the complete removal of the behaviors, and then the consistency of it. The consistency of exposure is what's key. That's what allows the neuroplasticity in the brain, the rewiring essentially to happen, is the consistent exposure. And the way that you do that is by focusing on what to do every time the thoughts pop up, so you make sure you're not engaging in any of those behaviors that are feeding the wheel. So it's not that ERP on intrusive thoughts is any more challenging than any other form of OCD. Oftentimes it can seem like that, but like I said, because the thoughts are coming so frequently often and so intensely, we can actually use that to our benefit as long as we're putting the correct behaviors into place to make sure that wheel's not spinning. So I hope that makes sense. And I want to add into the idea that it's not just about the mental behaviors, right? This is about the complete removal of all the behaviors, the physical and the mental. But I think the number one thing that I see people get stuck with Pure O is that most of their behaviors are mental, probably, 85, 90% of them. So what they often think is that I'm going to do this exposure, and they start doing behaviors without realizing it. And that keeps them stuck much longer than they need to be. So it's when you're doing an exposure with intrusive thoughts, oftentimes the thoughts will just pop up enough for the actual exposures to happen. In most cases, not in every case. Sometimes you actually need to move into triggering events. But initially it's like the thoughts pop up enough so we have enough exposure opportunity. But then it's about removing the behaviors. And the best way that I know to do that is the application of a solution focused model. So you're focusing on what to do every time as opposed to focusing on what not to do. And that separation right there, that one thing is huge, because then once we master that skill set, then all the other exposures that we engage in, whether it's watching a movie or you're going out to a place and the thoughts happen, these exposures are going to happen. But we got to make sure that the mental pattern, the mental solution that we're implementing is already habitually hardwired. Because what happens sometimes, I think, is that people rush into these exposures and then get caught ruminating, and essentially the exposure makes the loop worse. And it's just so important that we understand that doing an exposure and standing and getting triggered is not what makes you get better from OCD and anxiety. It's the removal of the behaviors while that's happening. And I just really want to stress that point, especially when it comes to intrusive thoughts and pure OCD. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope you're able to take some of that with you on your journey. And for those of you that are looking for help with this, I mean, the number one thing I would say is, when it comes to OCD and anxiety, like, the biggest shortcut that I know to getting better is to get guidance from people that have done it, just like anything else in life, right? And going the route of learning yourself and trial and error, it just takes up time that's unnecessary in most cases. So if this is something you're wrestling with, I really encourage you to head over to Restored Minds to get the guide, right? Start in the free training, and then we also have additional coaching programs and stuff to help you on this journey. So, I mean, yes, like, obviously take this and please, apply it. And I really hope this helps. But I mean, for those of you that are wrestling with intrusive thoughts, I mean, I just know the confusion and sometimes the hopelessness that can come as a side effect of them. And so if that's where you are, I really encourage you to get guidance and get support, because this is not a journey that you need to or should walk alone, in my opinion. So thank you guys for taking the time to hang out today. Again, I have some links right down in the notes to help you, to get you started on this journey. So please check those out. And with that said, I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care. Thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.